is CNN.
The following is a CNN special. The Pearl Harbor Codes. Could the attack have been prevented? From Washington, CNN military affairs correspondent Wolf Blitzer.
It is the day we all know, the day famous for its infamy. It is December 7th, 1941, the day Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, the day more than 2,000 Americans died. And now there is new evidence the United States could have known it was coming. Evidence from documents declassified just last week showed the United States intercepted close to 200 messages directly related to Pearl Harbor. We'll take a fresh look at the attack on Pearl Harbor with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell, just ahead. We'll have a rare interview with a senior historian of the super-secret National Security Agency, and we'll talk with a Pearl Harbor historian. But first, a look at what may have been weeks of inaction before the day of infamy. As early as September 5th, 1941, the Japanese Navy had sent this message to its Second Fleet. A state of complete readiness for battle operations must be achieved by the 1st of November. Expect even greater efforts toward achieving maximum fighting strength. And throughout October and November of that year, the Japanese Navy sent messages calling for more intensive dive bombing and shallow water torpedo drills. By working night and day, it should be possible to complete 10 drills by 6 November. Perhaps most dramatically, other messages showed Japanese tankers were positioned to support warships for a northern Pacific operation. A December 1 message even provided the specific location. At the time, U.S. military commanders assumed the warships were gearing up only for a southern operation against the Philippines or the Dutch East Indies. The only logical target for a northern operation, Pearl Harbor. All of these radio messages were available to U.S. communications intercept stations in Hawaii and Corregidor, but in a new study based on recently declassified documents, a U.S. National Security Agency historian says no one bothered to decode and translate them. A higher priority, historian Frederick Parker says, was breaking Japan's diplomatic codes. There was not enough manpower to focus attention on both. Parker's conclusion, the U.S. would have been prepared for the attack if more attention had been paid to these naval messages. The U.S. Navy, for example, had not even bothered to place anti-torpedo nets at Pearl Harbor, convinced the waters were simply too shallow for such an attack. Had U.S. Navy commanders read these messages, they would have learned that Japan was practicing a new technique for doing exactly that. Some historians are skeptical.
To put it into perspective, you have to realize also that he has the great benefit of hindsight. He knew exactly what to look for. And that's something that our commanders in Hawaii, the intelligence people both in Washington, Hawaii, and the Philippines didn't have.
Parker bases his analysis on a secret study undertaken by U.S. naval intelligence after the war in 1946 and 47. That study was declassified only last week. U.S. analysts and linguists went back and looked at all 26,000 Japanese naval messages intercepted by U.S. communication stations from July 1941 until December 7th, the day of the attack. Of those messages, 188 were directly related to the Pearl Harbor attack. If the secret messages were read at the time, Parker says, the analysts would have quickly deduced Japanese intentions to conduct a major northern campaign with a 6-carrier strike force. All of the pieces of the puzzle, he says, would have pointed inexorably to Pearl Harbor. Beyond the manpower shortages, there was another reason why the U.S. did not pay attention to Japan's naval messages. Most historians agree there was simply a mindset in place in Washington that the Japanese were incapable of undertaking such a complicated mission. The December 7th attack was the single worst shock in U.S. military history. Within a 2-hour span, 2,330 Americans were killed, 188 U.S. planes were destroyed or damaged, and 18 U.S. warships were sunk or badly damaged. It directly led to the U.S. involvement in World War II, and because the attack was such a complete surprise, it left a 50-year legacy on U.S. military thinking. How did this legacy come to pass? Joining us now for a closer look here in Washington, Frederick Parker, senior historian at the National Security Agency, and David Kahn in New York, historian whose books include The Code Breakers and Seizing the Enigma, The Race to Break the German U-Boat Codes. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Mr. Parker, do you have any doubt at all that if the U.S. had been monitoring the Japanese naval codes, the U.S. would have been ready for Pearl Harbor?
If they'd been able to read the codes and read the messages, there is no doubt in my mind at all that the analysts who worked in Hawaii and Corregidor would have understood exactly what the messages meant.
Those 188 messages would have pointed to Pearl Harbor, you're saying?
I think so, yes.
And why wasn't the United States intelligence community paying attention to what seems like such an obvious target?
Well, it's a complicated answer. There are two major efforts going on in Washington where all the research was being done on these codes. One of them was against the Japanese diplomatic codes, which were readable and which were providing every day the President and the Secretary of the Navy, all of the key people in Washington with the status of the negotiations between the Secretary of State and the Japanese ambassador. The other effort that was going on, which consumed an enormous amount of manpower, was running the direction finding net in the Atlantic, keeping track of German submarines.
Well, that's, all that is really critical, and you've done a really in-depth study. You've spent a lot of years looking at this. Mr. Kahn, in New York, you have a little different perspective on this whole question of the Japanese naval communications.
Yes, it's quite true that we were working very hard in solving successfully the Japanese diplomatic messages. We didn't have enough manpower to work on the Japanese naval messages. And although I think Fred Parker's study is a very significant and important one, I think, as Paul Stillwell said, he's looking at it with the benefit of hindsight. And I don't think that it would have been quite as clear as is now suggested that had these messages been available, out of the 20,000, these 188 would have been picked out. And from these, we would have seen that the attack to the north meant Hawaii. It could well have meant attacking the Soviet Union, which was at the very moment struggling to defend itself against the onslaught of Hitler's minions. So I don't think it's quite as clear as Fred Parker says.
We'll continue our discussion with Frederick Parker and David Kahn right after this.
Quality is amazing.
It sounds so great.
No scratches at all.
That's when music was music.
It's got everything.
Ramblin' Man.
Benny and the Jets.
It's all on CD.
Introducing the perfect Christmas gift, the Rock Archive CD Collection, free with your paid gift subscription to Entertainment Weekly.
Everybody's doing a grand dance now.
These drum licks are just thundering in here.
Any rocker will love it. 30 of the most listened to hits from the 60s to today, remastered and compiled for the first time on 2 beautifully produced CDs or 3 audio cassettes. And now you can get this great Christmas gift, free.
What?
Do I have to pay taxes on it?
It's free with a gift subscription to Entertainment Weekly, the magazine that's perfect for anyone who loves music, books, videos, and movies.
Entertainment Weekly is the postmodern farmer's almanac.
It's a great magazine.
Entertainment Weekly is like a quick fix on what's out there.
Concise, keeps me current.
I love the pictures.
Get kind of the behind-the-scenes look.
It cut to the chase. I want to talk about music and movies.
I like it because I don't have to be hip.
If you know someone who loves entertainment, then Entertainment Weekly is the perfect holiday gift because it gives you the inside scoop on the events and people in the entertainment world. Call now and get 52 issues for 77 cents an
Continuing now with Frederick Parker and David Kahn. Mr. Parker, you say these 188 messages, if read at the time, would have led inexorably to the attack on Pearl Harbor. The U.S. would have been prepared. Give me 2 or 3 specific examples that would have convinced the U.S. naval commanders to at least be ready for this attack.
Probably the most important distinctions are the messages which pointed directly at the Northern Pacific. specifically the weather messages, which would have been read and which probably gave the weather conditions along the track that the task force was going to take, and the northern location of the starting point for the task force way up north in the Kuril Islands. In my view, these messages would have shown the direction of the attack. The way the fuel supply was put on the vessel showed that the objective was an extraordinarily long distance away from Japan, far beyond their normal capabilities, and as the final thing, it would be the positioning of a tanker north of Midway to fuel the vessels on the way home.
Mr. Kahn, in New York, you've just written an article in Foreign Affairs, the Quarterly, which suggests there was a U.S. intelligence failure before Pearl Harbor. Some historians have argued there was no failure, that President Roosevelt and Churchill, Prime Minister Churchill, that they anticipated it, they knew it was coming, but they wanted it to come so there would be a pretext for the U.S. to enter the war. Do you accept that theory?
I don't accept that theory. I've looked very carefully at the evidence that these people have proposed to suggest that Roosevelt knew or that Churchill knew, and it simply doesn't stand up. There is no evidence, no smoking gun, no iota of information which suggested that either of them had data saying that an attack was going to come. There was never a single message that said anything like, we are going to attack Pearl Harbor, or even indicating in any way that Pearl Harbor was to be the target of some attack. So I reject these assertions. Roosevelt was quite as surprised as anybody else when the attack came, and so I believe was Churchill.
Mr. Parker, do you agree with that assessment?
I certainly do. Nothing in the research I've done even remotely suggests that there was a clue by either one of those gentlemen that the Japanese were going to attack Pearl Harbor.
Mr. Kahn, why do you believe so many conspiratorial theories are out there nowadays?
This is a difficult question to answer. I'm really not quite sure what the attraction of conspiracy theories is, but I think one of them in this case might be that it's simpler to blame Roosevelt for this failure than to blame the great American Army and Navy or the American people themselves or the Congress or all of us who were unprepared for this attack. So it's simpler, as it were, to blame them for that.
Mr. Parker, you've been with the National Security Agency for a long time. What intelligence lessons should be learned from this failure at Pearl Harbor?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Wolf. I think the most fundamental lesson is that it is possible to learn about an enemy's intentions from communications intelligence, an idea that was largely rejected in those days by most military planners.
And has the U.S. intelligence community learned that lesson? I'm not prepared to say. You'll have to ask someone else that. I'd ask General Powell. What about you, Mr. Kahn in New York? What do you think, the lesson, the major intelligence lesson from all of this for the U.S.?
Well, I was curious to see how Fred was going to answer it. But I think my conclusion would be that we need less, as it were, less collection and much more analysis. Had there been more analysis of these messages, there is a chance, as Fred says, that this would have shown an attack on Pearl Harbor. I don't believe it, but there's certainly a possibility of it. And this was still not done. The United States is still collecting quantities and quantities of electronic intelligence, which it doesn't have the analysts, enough analysts to look at more carefully and possibly generate information which would be of value for them.
David Kahn and Frederick Parker, thank you very much. When our special continues, what are other lessons from the military point of view? We'll talk with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell.
You know what's smart? This Magnavox digital CD shelf system that's incredibly powerful, compact, but what's really smart is this Magnavox 8mm Easy Cam that weighs less than 2 pounds. But what's really brilliant is this 13-inch TV with a built-in VCR. But what's ingenious is this 31-inch with a smart window that lets you see other channels and swap the picture. You know what's smart? This Magnavox digital CD... Go away.
The ingenious products from Magnavox. They're smart, very smart.
I was a dedicated beard wearer until my wife gave me the new Remington Microscreen Elite. It's quick. It's close. The Remington Microscreen Elite has 2 ultra-thin screens. So comfortable, shaves as close as a blade or your money back. That's Remington. Remington kicks off the Super Value Super Bowl sweepstakes. Win a free trip for 2 to the Super Bowl and get an NFL team cap free when you buy a Remington electric shaver. Enter the Remington Super Value Super Bowl sweepstakes.
Grandma's got a date. What's a date? That's when you hug someone.
Closeness. You might hesitate if you wore a diaper. So Johnson & Johnson created Serenity Guards. Bladder-controlled protection so advanced, it holds as much as something 5 times its size and stays dry, locking liquid in.
Grandma, are you gonna hug him? Hug me.
Oh. Give yourself hugs for discovering Serenity from Johnson & Johnson.
The Black & Decker Handy Chopper. The easiest way to make quick work of nuts, herbs, and onions. Always handy, cleans in a flash, making everyday meals a snap. The Handy Chopper from Black & Decker. Put us to work for you.
Fairchild's calling from the floor.
Today's business is a high-stakes game. CNN Business News gives you the edge with live reports from Wall Street and the day's business wrap-up every evening on Moneyline. The best business news in the business is on CNN.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Colin Powell, is here with us now. General, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blitzer, for inviting me.
Our pleasure. 50 years, a legacy for the U.S. military. What are the major lessons that you, as the top military officer in the United States, have learned from this?
Well, there are many lessons, and I would start out by saying that you can't separate the political lessons from the military lessons. The political lessons seem to me to be that you have to remain engaged in the world. You can't come back to Fortress America. We have interest in the Pacific and in the Atlantic, and we did at that time 50 years ago. The related military lesson is that if you have those interests, you have to be prepared to protect those interests and support those interests with military forces present in the region, and not just tripwire forces, but forces that can actually perform a mission, forces of the kind that would give assurance to our friends in a region and would also chill any potential challengers. I wonder what might have happened 50 years ago or 51 years ago if the Japanese Empire, when it was considering war, saw not just a fleet that had been suddenly moved from the west coast of California to Pearl Harbor, but a fleet that had been permanently stationed in the Pacific for a longer period of time, operating all over and demonstrating our interest to protect our friends in the region and our interest in the region.
So you're saying that today, 50 years later, the United States, after the Cold War, after the collapse of communism, after all of these dramatic developments, the United States cannot afford to disengage from its positions around the world?
I am absolutely convinced that the United States cannot afford to disengage from its interests around the world. Now, how you apply military force to those interests is something we can examine as a result of the significant changes that have taken place in the last few years. As you know, Secretary Cheney and I just returned from trips, as did Secretary Baker, to Korea and to Japan. And the consistent message we got from our friends both in Tokyo and in Seoul, and I might add elsewhere in the region, is stay engaged. We need U.S. presence in this part of the world as a stabilizing influence, and to make sure that old historic conflicts do not come back up to the forefront and cause a new level of instability in the region. So I'm absolutely convinced that the worst thing we could do at this point in our history would be to disengage, either from the Pacific or from the Atlantic. I mean, 8.5 years after Pearl Harbor, when you thought we would have learned our lesson, guess what happened? Korea. And once again, we had disengaged, we had not shown potential challengers in the region that we were prepared to protect our interest, and we were right back in the soup in June of 1950, 8.5 years after Pearl Harbor. And guess what? We weren't ready then either.
Well, Pearl Harbor, the huge U.S. military presence there before December 7th, 1941, was supposed to serve as a deterrent to any attack, yet it turned out to be a target. Can't the same argument be made today?
Well, I think one could make the argument. I don't think it would be a very effective one. Admiral Yamamoto, who was the mastermind of the attack, he knew that in the long run, Japan would lose. What he was hoping to do was to gamble. And if he could find us all in one location and essentially destroy the Pacific Fleet, then there might be some breathing room, a year or two, where Japan could consolidate its position in the Far East before United States power could be brought to bear. What we want to do in this new environment is to be sure that the United States military power can be brought to bear very, very quickly, so that no future challenger, and I'm not suggesting there's a threat like that out there now, but no future challenger anywhere in the world thinks that he can get a bye or a period of grace when he decides to challenge the interest of the United States of America. That would be the most destabilizing situation I can imagine in this new world situation we find ourselves in.
We'll have more to explore with General Powell, and we'll do it right after this break.
Grandma's got a date. What's a date? That's when you hug someone.
Closeness. You might hesitate if you wore a diaper. So Johnson & Johnson created Serenity Guards, bladder-controlled protection so advanced it holds as much as something 5 times its size and stays dry, locking liquid in.
Grandma, are you gonna hug him? Hug me.
Oh. Give yourself hugs for discovering Serenity from Johnson & Johnson.
There's a new pet.
Chia.
Chia Pet, the pottery that grows. It's fun and easy. Soak your chia, spread the seeds, keep it watered, and watch it grow. And now grow a whole collection of fun with Chia teddy bears, puppies, kittens, rams, bulls. There's even a chia tree to keep your pets company. Chia Pets and Trees, the pottery that grows.
The Chia Pet and Chia Tree are available at Kmart, Walgreens, Rite Aid, and Woolworth. Makes a great gift.
A kiss? No, I'm sorry. I don't think so.
Oh, no, please, no, baby, no.
Oh, not a good idea. Not now.
No, bad time. Fight morning breath with Scope. Scope has 2 powerful ingredients that kill 90% of the bacteria that cause morning breath.
Your kiss is ready. Pucker up.
Right on the kisser. Come on. Kiss morning breath goodbye with Scope.
Give me that kiss. A lot of people have been staying up to watch the late news. These days, it's important to stay informed. If you're going to keep up with current events, impress your colleagues at the office, or engage in stimulating conversation. Fortunately, there's a network that lets you stay up on the news.
Any questions?
Without staying up. CNN Headline News. The latest news, business, and sports around the clock.
Continuing with General Colin Powell. General, could this happen again today in your scenarios that you can continuously look at? Could the U.S. lose 2,300 troops in one day, 18 warships, 188 planes? Is that feasible in your opinion?
I would think not. I think our intelligence systems, our warning systems, our readiness systems, our threat-con systems, as we call them in the Pentagon, are pretty good. We keep a close watch on the world. We have a pretty good idea of what potential opponents may be doing at any one time, so I think it unlikely that such a single catastrophic blow can be struck today.
You were just a young baby
4 years old
when this whole thing was happening, but then you went through the ranks and Pearl Harbor was there in your mind. How was it there?
Well, I was an infant during the years of World War II, but then as an adolescent I also lived through the period of Korea. So for most of my youth, the nation was in war one way or the other. And then when I joined the Army, became a professional, we thought about World War II and Pearl Harbor. We talked about it. And the message that was always driven home was that don't ever be unready. Don't ever fail to have your picket line out, so to speak. Always make sure that when you're ready to go in harm's way, you do it in the most professional way possible. And take advantage of every opportunity you have, intelligence, operating patterns, readiness patterns, alert systems. And always look for that little piece of information that is out of the ordinary. You've got to try to somehow pull it up out of the mass of data that comes in and recognize it for something that is out of the ordinary and should be acted on.
You heard this previous discussion we had on the intelligence failures, the missed Japanese naval codes. What goes through your mind when you hear that?
Well, I don't know what to make of all of that. It's very easy in hindsight to see all of the clues that were there, and it's always great fun and a lot of interest to develop schemes and double scenarios as to what happened. Clearly, there was enough information there that had we been able to collate it all and correlate it all and get it all translated, may have given better indicators to the national authorities at that time as to what was going to happen. But I can't say that with any authority. I have no way of knowing. It's always easy to look at it after the fact.
Now you're going to be going out to Pearl Harbor on December 7th to participate in the commemorative events. Is the United States making too much of this 50th anniversary? Why all of these activities right now?
Well, the survivors think a great deal about this event. It was a seminal event in their lives. It was a seminal event in the life of our nation. It set us on a crusade that subsequently resulted in the defeat of fascism both in the Pacific and in the Atlantic. So it was perhaps one of the most historic points in our national history, and I think it's worthy of noting that it was that on its 50th anniversary. So I don't think we're making too much of it. I think it's well worth all the attention being given to the event.
Are you concerned that it could negatively impact on U.S.-Japanese relations?
No, I don't think so. And in fact, as you know, I was in Japan last week, received by all the senior officials, even received an award, Order of the Rising Sun, curiously.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And so they understand that it is an American experience that we have to go through. It's very important for us to go through this. And I think the Japanese are, whether they are understanding or not, I think they understand what we have to do. And I don't think it will have any impact on American-Japanese relations.
Did they at all raise this issue?
Never raised it.
With you?
Never raised it.
And as you're about to embark, the President of the United States is going, Defense Secretary Dick Cheney is going. What goes through your mind right now?
What it must have been like at 7:55 on the morning of 7 December 1941, when the noise of those airplanes came over and when suddenly every GI at Pearl Harbor and all the other locations in the Honolulu area looked up and realized this isn't a drill, this is for real, this is war. That is always a chilling thought.
General, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Whether the Pearl Harbor attack could have been prevented will likely be debated for years to come, but it's an issue that goes well beyond academia. It's also a story of people, 2,330 of them who died that day, and it's a story of many, many more who remember to this day. I'm Wolf Blitzer.
Coming up, Early Prime, followed by Showbiz Today, after a word from your local cable system, here on CNN.
Cinemax gives me a lot of variety.
I love all kinds of movies, and they've got them all.
Thoroughly entertaining.
No commercials. Countless movies on Cinemax.
It offers things that no one else seems to have.
Save a lot of money.
For people who like movies, Cinemax is America's best pay TV service.
24 hours, 7 days a week, movies. I come in anytime, it's there.
Cinemax, if you like movies.
Charlie Deegan's life is almost perfect.
This is going to be a great weekend.
He has the perfect career,
You'll be governor in 5 years.
the perfect secretary, and a perfectly dreadful wife.
Why are you so ungrateful?
Now, if only Charlie had the perfect alibi,
Help me and I'll do anything you ask.
he could get away with the perfect murder. Brian Brown, Veronica Cartwright, Dead in the Water, a USA world premiere movie. Wednesday, December 4th at 9. Lifetime presents two unexpected experiences in one extraordinary hour. Come face to face with the how and why of real crime and passion, with true confessions of crime, and gaze into the eye of fear and the soul of dreams in a world of secrets and shadows. The Hidden Room. Confessions of Crime. The Hidden Room. Reality will never look the same again.
Beyond man's world lies nature's untamed wilderness. From the frozen glaciers of the high Arctic to the forbidding depths of Earth's vast oceans. Tales of survival and preservation among the creatures of the wild. Uncover the mysteries of Mother Earth and witness the spectacle of life among those who inhabit the kingdom of the wild. Thursday on A&E.
This is CNN.